Hello, everybody. I am here today to fix a mistake. I messed up in my original skeleton video, which I will have to eventually modify for future reference. I realized, based on your guys' feedback, that I actually skipped a bone, and that was not my intent. The bone that I am referring to is actually really important, and it is the clavicle, which is right here. And yeah, in my original tutorials, I'm just going to delete the other side of the skeleton here. I'll leave the legs alone because they're fine. I left out this little guy right here. So I created a lazy version of the skeleton that looked like this, which is missing the clavicle, which from an animation standpoint will limit what is possible from an ability to pose and move the arm in an anatomically correct fashion. So we will go back and add that in. Now, obviously, adding it as you create the arm from scratch is very easy. You would literally just create clavicle, shoulder, elbow, wrist, hand, so on and so forth. But if you've, I'm going to use this video because most of you have already got that base skeleton built as an opportunity to show you how to add that joint in manually. Now, there's a few ways to do it. I could use the joint tool, create joint, literally just drop a joint. It doesn't really matter where it is. Hit enter, and then point snap it to the shoulder and literally just move it over into place. And then at that point, you can, the radius, if I want to match the radius of the other ones, looks like I've got the other set to 4. But you see, I used the point snap, which is the V key, to snap these two together to kind of get an establishing point so that they're lined up closely to each other. And I just slide this straight over and go from there. Now, the disadvantage of doing it this way is the orientation may differ from what you already have. So then you would have to also freeze the transformations of the joint and reorient it. So let's open up the orientation tool and just have a look. And as I expected, you can see these have different base orientations right now. I can't remember if this version of the skeleton is oriented at all. It looks like it is. Looks like I've got Z as a primary, or secondary, sorry, with it pointing in the negative y-axis. So if I want to match this up, I would have to run the orientation command on it. In order for the orient command to work, these have to be parented first, because orientation doesn't work unless there's a child present. So what I do want to change, though, is I don't want to orient the children of the selected joint, because I don't want to reorient all of them. Although, to be honest with you, if I did, it's not going to break anything. So, yeah, because if I reorient them all, they're all going to end up exactly what they look like now anyway, if I use the right settings. But if I want to be choosy, I could just select this joint, turn off orient children, and it will only orient the one I have selected. Don't be fooled by all these being green. Again, if I look in the outliner, you can see I actually only have my clavicle selected. The others, even though they're green, it's just because they're children. When it comes to parent-child relationships, the child will always highlight, even if you've only got the parent selected. If you have the children selected, you'll see the whole chain will be white, and the last selected joint will be green. So Maya's selection indicator is not actually green. It's white and green. And green just means if everything's green, that means you've got one object selected. If you see a combination of white and green, the white represents selected objects, and the green represents the last selected object. So in this case, the hand. Now, again, for this example, I'm just going to reorient the joint. And I want the same settings as I've got here. So as I said, it's going to be, based on what I'm seeing here, I've got Z as my secondary, so I'm going to choose Z. And it's facing down, which is negative Y, because we know in Maya, Y is up and down. So I choose X, Z, Y, negative. So that's pointing downwards. I'll hit apply. And sure enough, now I've got that reoriented and everything is good to go. So that's one way I could create the skeleton cleanly and create that joint that I missed. The other way, and probably the way I would do it myself most times, would be to temporarily unparent the elbow from the shoulder, to leave the shoulder all by itself, and just go ahead and duplicate the shoulder. The beauty about doing it that way is that you've got the orientation already taken care of because your shoulder's been oriented already. So if I hit Control D, that's the hotkey for duplicate. And the reason I unparented, by the way, is because the way hierarchies work, if I didn't unparent it, it could mess with the hierarchy and it could get a little bit confusing. So I just tore it apart temporarily. And I'm literally just going to slide it straight over. And you can see the orientation matches because it's a duplicate. So obviously I would need to rename it. So I'll call this left clavicle, or left clav, or some people call this left shoulder, and call this the left upper arm, which is what I've got it called here. So if I'm following the Motion Builder Human IK naming standard, which I've talked about in the past, then yeah, this by rights should be left shoulder. We'll talk about the Human IK standard a little bit more later and more in assignment 3. And now I would just parent them back together again. So elbow to upper arm to shoulder, shoulder down to the next joint in the spine. Be careful not to parent your shoulder to the neck. That will do very strange things. So we, again, should always go down to the whatever spine joint is below it, usually. Once I've got that done, I can mirror it over to the other side with the usual tool. Now, while I'm in skeleton editing mode, I'm going to take this time to not only talk about the clavicle, but to talk about some of the other joints that you may end up needing when it's all said and done. Our skeleton is the basic version of a skeleton. And again, just the bare minimum you need to get a character to function properly. But there are some helper bones that you can add to improve things like deformations and animations. And I'm just going to just take this time to talk about some of the ones you might use. Again, none of these are required for assignment 2 or assignment 1 if you're doing it again. Don't panic. This is just extra information that will fill in some blanks, perhaps for some of these who decide to take this further. One extra that you'll get in a lot of skeletons are twist bones. Sometimes you'll see twist bones in all of the major arm and leg joints. Sometimes you'll only see them in a basic scenario in just the forearm, because in real life, because we've got 2 bones that kind of control the range of motion and the rotation of our forearm and wrist, that one, of all the joints in the legs and arms, that's the one that would generally have the physical ability to twist the most in most humans. Obviously, you've got some double jointed individuals who are a little bit more flexible than others. Now, to add those joints, I would use the same basic technique that I did for the clavicle, to be honest with you. I would generally duplicate joints that already exist and rename them. The advantage of that is, again, orientation matches up. So, because it's really important that those joints are in line and straight with what's there. Now, I'm just looking at this joint here. I just realized my elbow actually isn't straight. Just noticed it by a fluke. You can see the X is just ever so slightly off, which is not good. So I'm gonna have to reorient I should have oriented the children. So I'm gonna go back to my orientation tool. use the same settings as before. I'm going to turn children back on, and just watch. You'll see this X will adjust ever so slightly. See that? Now it's in line again. It was off by probably 1 degree or less, which doesn't sound like much, but in the grand scheme of things, that could make a major difference. Now, just because I've reoriented it, I'm going to make sure, and sure enough, I will need to zero out the end joint again, just to be safe. And now this should be a nice, clean arm joint to start with. So if I want to create helpers, I would do the same thing as I did previously. I'm going to just take all the arm joints temporarily, Shift P them to tear them apart. And in an arm, at the very least, you'll almost have at least one helper joint. And again, called a twist joint or rotation joint, halfway between these two. So I'm going to duplicate the elbow, Control D, and I'm going to make sure I'm in object mode, and I'm going to slide my duplicate forward so that it's pretty much halfway between the two. This doesn't have to be exactly halfway. I'm just going to guesstimate it. There are a few strategies that we could use to make it halfway, but for now, just eyeball it. As long as it's close, this is definitely not an area where being precise matters that much. And then I would parent these back together again. Just using the P key, making sure I do it in the right order. So now we've got this extra joint here so that when you're twisting the wrist, for example, right now with the way it used to be, I would have to do all that twisting from right here, which in real life, you twist your wrist in this direction and just watch what happens and feel what happens. Put your other hand around your forearm and you can feel the radius and the ulna rolling over each other. And with just this joint, we're not simulating that. So this represents the extra rotation that happens in your forearm, which again, anatomically should be there. So now I've got the ability to spread that rotation across two joints. And it doesn't stress the geometry as much. What it does is it spreads the deformation of the geometry across a larger surface area, which is definitely advantageous. So at the very least, in a proper final rig, you will often see the forearm has a twist joint. But in some rigs, you will find them also in the upper arm, halfway there, in the upper and lower legs as well, in the shin and the upper leg. So I would use the same technique to build it. Again, if you know you're going to need these, building them with the joint tool right from scratch when you're plotting all your original joints is a valid option. But like I said, the goal of this video is to show you how to add things into your skeleton after the fact. Now, the last thing I wanted to show you is fingers. I do want you guys to generate fingers for your final assignment. Even though I'm not requiring you to rig them, that's going to be an optional assignment for number 3. I still want everybody to create the fingers. So again, creating fingers is not much different than creating an arm. And what I want you guys to do is make use of duplication to speed the process up. So first things first, I'm going to go and bring in my character model here. And obviously we've got fingers in place, so I'm going to create a finger joint. So I'm going to go to my front view. I apologize if there's background noise. I don't know if you guys are picking it up, but my superintendent is mowing the lawn right now. So if you hear any background noise, it's my lawn being cut in our condo. So hopefully it's not too bad. I'll get to see the quality of my mic. I'm going to use the Create Joints tool. I'm just going to start visually here at the knuckle. And I'm not going to try to trace the finger at this point. I'm just going to draw it straight and just kind of imagining roughly where it needs to be. Because again, I want to try to create a perfect joint system as possible. So I'm just going to go click, base of the finger, that's this knuckle here. Click, that's going to be this knuckle right here. Click, that's going to be this knuckle right here, and click. This is going to be the tip of the finger. Now, I don't know if it lines up yet. Doesn't matter. I know right now this is perfectly straight and clean, which is what I'm more worried about. Now that I've got that done, I will rotate them in their own axis roughly to get them started. Now, at this point, I'm going to move the base. So I'm just selecting the main joint. I'm going to slide it into position and line it up with the actual knuckle of the character to get it close. I'm going to rotate the main joint to get the angle about right, and I'm going to look at it from the front. And I'm going to rotate it, the whole thing again, around its own axis until it feels like it's lined up with the same angle as the finger, just to get started. So obviously I'm close, but I still need to make some adjustments. So now I'm going to make sure my move tool is in object mode, just like I did with the legs and the arms. And now, because I'm in object mode, I can change the position by sliding each of those knuckles forwards and backwards along its own axis to get them lined up. Don't forget the insert key. If you use the insert key, you can slide inner joints without moving the end joint, because I already placed the tip of the finger. So I'm pretty happy with the placement I've got here right now. I'm going to look at it down the front again. Slide that over, and again, rotate the whole thing forward. And now that looks like it's lined up pretty darn good to me. So that's one finger done. Now what I'm going to do, looks like I accidentally set keyframes. Notice how I must have hit the S key. I've got some red channels here. That means I've set a keyframe. And you can see the keyframe here. I don't want any keyframes on this finger. That was a mistake. So with it selected, I'm actually going to select the whole thing just in case I keep others. It doesn't look like I did, but just to be safe. And the easiest way to delete keyframes completely is with everything selected that you want to delete the keys on. Go to the Edit, Delete by Type, Channels. So channels are this. So if you delete a channel, you're going to delete everything in that channel, including animations. So delete by type, channels. And I'm not going to do delete all by type. That will delete all the channels in the entire scene, which I don't have any other keyframes right now, but if I did, it would destroy all of them. Delete by type is only going to affect whatever you have selected. So now you can see my channel information is gone, and this is all good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually zero, because now that I know my finger fits, I want to create a neutral version of the hand that kind of matches up with this eventually. But just to make it clean to start with, I'm going to actually zero out the rotations, which is going to straighten the finger back up and make it perfectly align with the grid again, as you can see. And I'm going to use this position to orient the knuckles. And for the joint orient, for the knuckles, I still want to be consistent. And I'm going to want to orient them in a way that so that when I bend them, they match up with the orientations that I've got in the rest of the geometry. So let me just turn on the orientations for the whole character so I can see what I've got here. I can't remember how I set it up, but it looks like Z is my secondary. As I've mentioned many times in the past, whatever your primary and secondary axes are, honestly doesn't matter that much as long as there's consistency throughout the character and throughout your pipeline so that all your characters are the same. I'm going to go to Display, Transform Display, turn on Local Rotation Axes. And yeah, actually I'm going to reorient the whole character anyway because it looks like actually this version of the character hasn't been oriented yet, which is fine. Just knowing that is important. So I'm going to just tear all the limbs off. And I'm going to go with the orientation that I've been talking about in the live sessions when I'm helping you guys. So that would be for the legs and spine, they will be identical. So those will be X, Y, X, positive. X, Y, X, positive. And then for the arms, will be X, Y, Y, positive. Looks like I turned off the orientation for the arms, which I don't want. I want to see them. There we go. And so for the fingers, I'm going to want Y facing forwards, I believe, which would be X, Y, Z, because Z is forwards in Max, or sorry, in Maya. Now, I'm getting the error, it won't let me. That's because I need to freeze the transformations on my finger in its current position, which I haven't done yet. So I'm going to go Modify, Freeze Transformations. That's because I've already moved it and rotated it and I didn't freeze it yet. Now I've oriented it and just want to test it. So I want it so that positive Y. So you can see when I rotate down, it's actually negative Y. I'm just testing it. So I was almost right. It actually should be XYZ negative. So that'll flip the Y's backwards. Well, so I'll just run this again. So now you can see the Y's are all pointing backwards. And now when I bend the finger, it's a positive value, which is what I wanted. So that's my finger orientation. Now I've got to go through and take all my end joints and either run the orient to world command as I've shown in the past, or just grab them each and select them and set their joint orient values to 0, 0, 0. So now I've got a perfectly oriented character, fingers included, and I'll just delete this leg and mirror it after with the good orientation. And I'm ready to go. So now with the fingers, I'm going to select all my joints once again and turn the orientation axes off. I think that's all of them, yep. So now with the fingers, I can just duplicate this finger chain 5 times, or 4 times. Sorry, I've already got one. So Control D, line it up with that knuckle. Control D, line it up with that knuckle. Control D, line it up with that knuckle. Control D, line it up with this knuckle. A lot of people get the thumb mixed up. There's a knuckle right here for your thumb. It attaches almost at the base of the wrist. That is the thumb's extra joint. A lot of people think the thumb has one less joint than the fingers. It doesn't. It just looks different. So obviously I've got 3 fingers or 5 fingers all pointing off in the same direction, and they're all exactly the same length. But they need fine tuning. So now I'm just going to use them in object mode to slide them into place so that they actually intersect the body where they should. And then finally, one at a time, I'm going to rotate them back. Actually, I'm going to start, I won't do them one at a time. I'm going to start moving them all together, except for the thumb. The thumb needs its own for sure, but with the fingers, they're so similar. If I rotate them all together, I should be able to get them pretty darn close before I even start fine-tuning them. So I'm just rotating all the base fingers. Now I'll just take them one at a time, get their angles right. Now I look at them each down the barrel of the finger and make sure that they're all pivoted correctly. Like, for example, this one needs to be twisted a little bit to the left. The pinky for sure needs to be twisted a little bit more this direction. It's too high, so I'm going to slide the pinky down to get it inside the finger. This one is a bit too high. You see what I'm doing? I'm moving them all in object mode to get them close. And now I'm ready to adjust the length of each of them. So I'm just going to start the base knuckle. So the beauty about doing it this way is that the original one takes care of all the overall orientations. And as you're adjusting them, you shouldn't have to worry about the orientations again. As long as you move them in object mode. Again, that's key, is object mode. Make sure I get this one in the right location. So now I gotta just do this one. And finally the thumb. The thumb should be, it's an opposing thumb that we all have, us and the apes. So opposing means it's rotated about 90 degrees from the fingers. So that's really important so that the thumb bends inward. And once you get that roughly positioned, you give it the same treatment as the others. Make sure the length of each individual joint is about right. Now, if you've done it correctly, you literally should be able to select them all. Just making sure I got all the right base selection here. Batman, you're in my way. I'm gonna hide the Dark Knight. There we go. Just gonna make sure they're all open so I can grab all the fingers. Is a cool trick for testing these. So if I select every joint I just made, literally, there they all are. Oh, don't want the leg. There we go. Because they're all oriented, at least they should be, if I rotate them in Y all together, you can see the entire hand curls naturally. If this doesn't work, that means one of your fingers' orientations is incorrect. But you can see the thumb is going inwards underneath the fingers, and the fingers are all curling around it. That just tells you that not only is your fingers positioned correctly, you have oriented them correctly as well. So now that I've done that test, I'll bring Batman back because I don't want to mess up my alignment here. Get those back into where they started. Now the last step, obviously we want to connect these to the hand. We can actually take our shoulder, rotate it down into position temporarily to get it lined up with where it should be in the body. I can delete my current end joint for the hand. I no longer need it if I've got fingers. And I literally just take all of these finger joints, the parents, and parent them to my wrist with the P key. And now Batman has hands. And if I zero this back out again to its neutral position, it's going to drag the fingers with it. And that's pretty much it. I've got a nice, perfect set of fingers with good orientations and pretty much ready to go. I could freeze the transformations if I want to set this as my 0 position, which might not be a bad idea. So if I select the fingers and go modify, freeze transformations, you can see now this is the home base. So if I zero everything out on the fingers, it will come back to this exact pose. So now I would parent this back in, mirror it. Oh, after I label them, don't forget to label your joints for the fingers. I'm not going to do it manually here, but essentially, I will explain. I somehow locked my view. Hold on a second. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what I did there. I must have hit a hotkey that I didn't realize existed, but ultimately it was treating my perspective view as an orthographic view. And in Maya, when you're in an orthographic view, you can't rotate it. They're all locked by default, which is normal, but it isn't normal for the perspective to be thinking that it's orthographic. So I'm not sure what I did, but to fix it, all I did was I went into View, predefined bookmarks, and chose perspective. And that pretty much resets your perspective camera back to the factory default. and it fixed my problem. So again, I'm not sure what I did, but again, I must have hit a hotkey that I didn't realize existed. Anything camera related, Maya, usually if you update the predefined bookmarks or reload it, that will usually fix any camera anomalies that might occur. Okay, so I'm going to go and mirror the skeleton. And for the labeling of the fingers, I'm just going to verbally tell you guys, pretty much, you've got index, index 1, index 2, index end, middle, middle 1, middle 2, middle end, END, ring, ring 1, ring 2, ring end. See a pattern here? Pinky, pinky 1, pinky 2, pinky end, thumb, thumb 1, thumb 2, thumb end. So if you label, and obviously right and left, so this would be the left side, and then when you mirror it, well, not orient it, when you mirror it using the joint mirror tool, you can get that renamed on the other side. So that is a little bit of extra joint bonus information. Like I said, you guys do need the fingers for the end of assignment 2. So please do add them. You do not require a twist joint. If you put it in there, it's fine. I won't dock any marks, but you won't gain any marks with it either. It's up to you. I just wanted to make sure you knew they existed and how to add them. For that matter, you could add other joints as well. You could add basic joints to represent the rib cage if you wanted to, and that might improve the skinning in that area and give you a little bit more ability to simulate things like heaving of the chest or breathing and stuff like that, because you could animate the joints a little bit differently. Just keep in mind, depending on the application, extra joints or helper joints are great from an animation and rigging standpoint, but for real time, for example, for a game environment, each joint has a cost. They take up extra processing cycles, and they all each have to be calculated. So in a game, they could slow the gameplay down, which is obviously something that can't be taken lightly, and it's always a decision that has to be made with the team to decide what type of game it is, how important is max frame rate, and what kind of impact that the complexity of your characters or for that matter vehicle skeletons may have on the actual gameplay. So I'm going to stop this video here. I hope it helps give some insight. I apologize for the original mistake of not including the clavicles when I should have. But now that they exist, hopefully you guys are comfortable adding them into your own skeletons.